Hey guys, tonight we are trotting into the misty mountains of ancient Greek mythology, into a world of heroes, gods, and some very peculiar creatures. You've probably seen them in paintings, read about them in epic tales, or maybe even encountered them in your favorite fantasy games. Those iconic beings, half human, half horse the noble wise, or sometimes terrifyingly wild centaurs. Picture their powerful equine bodies, the thundering hooves combined with the torso, arms, and head of a man. It's a classic image, right? But what if I told you that the original ancestor of that formidable earthy herd wasn't quite so solid? What if its origins were far more ethereal, more atmospheric, perhaps even a little bit damp? Yes, tonight we're going to gently explore the rather startling idea that the original centaur might have actually been a rain cloud. I know it sounds a bit out there, but stick with me. If you were to try and explain that at a mythical family reunion, yes, great-great-grandpa Ixion was a bit of a scoundrel, and great-great-grandma Nephili, well, she had a charming, if occasionally unpredictable tendency to dissipate in strong winds. It would certainly make for some awkward silences around the nectar bowl. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's like leaving a little offering of digital ambrosia, and it truly helps these sleepy stories reach other curious minds. And as always, I'd love it if you'd post your current location and local time in the comments below. It's wonderful to imagine our little community of history dreamers scattered across the quiet hours of the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're familiar with the centaur, that powerful, often imposing figure, a staple of Greek mythology. We think of Chiron, the wise and gentle tutor of heroes like Achilles and Jason, a beacon of civility amongst his often rowdy kin. Or perhaps you recall Nessus, whose treachery led to the agonizing death of Heracles. They are creatures of the wild mountains and forests, often associated with untamed nature, potent desires, and sometimes outright bestial behavior. Their image seems so concrete, so viscerally physical. The scent of horsehide, the pounding of hooves on the earth, the strength of a warrior. So you thought centaurs were just the ancient Greeks' rather buff version of My Little Pony men, with an extra serving of angst and archery skills. Well, tonight we're going to gently unbuckle that familiar notion and peer into a much stranger and, dare I say, more overcast origin story. The most obvious explanation for the centaur myth, the one that often springs to mind for us moderns trying to rationalize these ancient tales, is the first encounter theory. Imagine ancient Greeks perhaps unaccustomed to widespread horsemanship, seeing skilled riders from distant lands, Scythians from the steppes perhaps, or Thessalian horsemen closer to home, and misinterpreting man and mount as a single composite creature. It's a neat theory, and we'll definitely touch upon it later. But the ancient Greeks themselves, those master storytellers, had a far more fantastical and, frankly, much more scandalous explanation for the very first centaur. This isn't some obscure modern reinterpretation I've cooked up. It's a fascinating mainstream historical fact that some of the most respected ancient Greek literary sources, including the poet Pindar in his Pythian Ode 2, and later mythographers like Apollodorus and Diodorus Siculus, explicitly recount a rather bizarre tale involving a reckless king, a lustful transgression, a divine trick, and yes, a creature born from a cloud. This cloud named Nephili was no ordinary cumulus. She was a phantom, a doppelganger of a goddess crafted by Zeus himself. And her union with a mortal man, King Ixion, is said to have spawned the centaur race, or at least their problematic progenitor. So how does a creature so often depicted as robustly equine and fiercely terrestrial trace its ancestry back to something as insubstantial as a cloud? It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Centaurs are often symbols of untamed nature, certainly, but we tend to associate them with the earth, with mountains like Pelion and Ossa, with dark forests and hidden glades. Yet if we think about it, clouds too are potent symbols of nature's wilder, less predictable side. They are denizens of the mountain peaks, bringers of life-giving rain, but also destructive storms, ever-shifting, untamable, belonging to the realm of the sky gods. Could this cloud origin be a meteorological metaphor? A poetic way of describing storm spirits or mountain mist given a strange hybrid form? Most of us just check the weather forecast to see if we need an umbrella. The ancient Greeks, with this particular myth in their back pocket, they might have been checking the skies for potentially centaur-generating atmospheric conditions. Looking a bit cloudy with a distinct chance of monstrous half-horse people later this afternoon. Better stay indoors. This cloud parent idea certainly adds a layer of unsettling weirdness to the centaur mythos. It makes them creatures not just of the earth, but also of the ephemeral sky, born from an illusion, a divine deception. Scholars, as you might imagine, have long debated the true origins and meanings of the centaur myth. Is it primarily a meteorological metaphor, as the Ixian and Nephili story suggests? Is it a garbled folk memory of encountering foreign horse-riding cultures for the first time? Is it a purely symbolic representation of humanity's dual nature, the rational human mind versus our more primal, animalistic instincts? Or is it, as is so often the case with these rich, ancient myths, a complex, multi-layered fusion of all these elements and perhaps others we haven't even considered? A quirky tidbit is that some very early, more abstract artistic representations of centaurs on ancient Greek vases and pottery seem less concerned with achieving perfect equine anatomical accuracy and more focused on conveying a sense of wild, chaotic, almost elemental energy. Their forms can be a little distorted, their movements exaggerated. One could almost, if you squint and let your imagination drift, see in that turbulent energy an echo of a storm cloud, given a vaguely humanoid and equine form, a creature of dynamic, untamed power rather than just a simple man-horse. As we embark on this sleepy exploration, try to let go of that solid, familiar image of the centaur just for a little while. Instead, picture misty mountaintops, swirling clouds taking on strange, fleeting shapes, the scent of rain on dry earth, the cool, intangible touch of a phantom. We're going to delve into the story of a king whose arrogance knew no bounds, a god whose anger was legendary, and a cloud woman who was more and less than she appeared. It's a tale that begins with an act of shocking betrayal and a desperate plea for purification, a plea that will set in motion a chain of events leading to a truly bizarre, and for the ancient Greeks, deeply resonant creation. Our first step on this cloudy path is to meet the man at the heart of this storm, the infamous King Ixion. We've just opened the ancient, creaky, and perhaps slightly damp mythological case file on the centaur, hinting that its origins might be less about sturdy horseflesh and more about something as fleeting as a cloud. And as promised, at the very heart of this strange atmospheric disturbance, this impending storm of myth, stands a mortal man, King Ixion. His story is a rather potent cocktail of arrogance, betrayal, and some truly terrible decision-making, all of which sets the stage for one of Greek mythology's more bizarre and memorable creations. So let's you and I gently materialize in ancient Thessaly, a region of Greece famed for its horses. A rather deliciously ironic setting given what's to come. Here you find Ixion, a king of the Lapith people. In some tales, he's a figure of some standing, perhaps even boasting a distant divine connection in his lineage, as so many ancient heroes and kings did. But whatever his initial status, Ixion was a man whose ambition and desires would soon lead him down a very dark and fiery path. His first truly catastrophic misstep, the one that really put him on the mythological map for all the wrong reasons, involved his father-in-law, a man named Dionaeus, or sometimes Ionaeus. You see, Ixion had married Dionaeus' daughter, and as was customary, had promised her father some splendid bridal gifts. However, Ixion, being the charming and utterly reliable fellow, he apparently wasn't decided to renege on this promise. Dionaeus, understandably miffed, and probably needing those gifts, decided to take matters into his own hands and helped himself to some of Ixion's prized horses as collateral. Ixion's response to this was, shall we say, disproportionate and horrifyingly inventive. He feigned reconciliation, inviting Dionaeus to a grand feast. But beneath the veneer of hospitality, he'd prepared a truly ghastly trap, a deep pit filled with burning wood and embers cleverly disguised with a thin layer of earth and branches. As Dionaeus arrived, likely expecting a feast and perhaps the return of his promised gifts, he was guided towards this treacherous spot and plunged to his death in the fiery chasm. So, Ixion's unique approach to resolving a rather straightforward financial dispute with his father-in-law was memorable. And by memorable, I mean utterly horrifying and deeply flammable. Definitely not going to win any Son-in-Law of the Year awards with that kind of behavior. This act was considered monstrous even by the often robust standards of ancient Greek myth. It wasn't just murder, it was the murder of a kinsman, a guest under the sacred guise of hospitality Xenia. In some traditions, this was even cited as the very first instance of kinslaying among mortals. The pollution of this crime, the blood guilt, clung to Ixion like a suffocating shroud. No mortal king or priest would dare to perform the purification rituals for him. They recoiled in horror. He became an outcast shunned by gods and men alike, and in many versions of the tale he was driven quite mad by his guilt and relentlessly pursued by the terrifying Erinyes, the Furies, those ancient goddesses of vengeance. Some ancient accounts even say that before Zeus's eventual intervention, Ixion wandered the earth so tormented and polluted by his crime that the very crops withered where he trod, and wild animals instinctively fled from his accursed presence, as if nature itself recoiled from his spiritual contamination. Now here's where the story takes a rather unexpected turn. Just when you think Ixion is doomed to wander as a pariah forever, who should step in but Zeus, the king of the gods himself? It's a well-established mainstream historical fact within the mythological narratives that Zeus, for reasons that aren't always entirely clear, took pity on the wretched Ixion. Perhaps Zeus recognized a sliver of distant divine ancestry, or maybe he saw an opportunity for a moral lesson, or perhaps, as was sometimes his way, he just felt like doing something unpredictable. Whatever his motive, Zeus performed the extraordinary act of personally purifying Ixion of his blood guilt. He then, in an even more astonishing display of divine generosity, invited the newly cleansed, if still deeply problematic king, up to Mount Olympus to dine with the immortal gods to feast on nectar and ambrosia. Imagine that you commit one of the most heinous crimes imaginable and your get-out-of-jail-free card includes a dinner party with the supreme deities. Zeus clearly had a very unique approach to his divine HR department and background checks for his Olympian dinner guests. You'd think that such an incredible act of mercy and honor would inspire eternal gratitude in Ixion, wouldn't you? You'd imagine him being on his absolute best behavior, bowing and scraping, and generally trying not to breathe too loudly in the presence of the gods. But Ixion, it seems, was not one for learning from his mistakes, nor was he burdened by an excess of good sense or humility. Instead of being overwhelmed with gratitude while dining on the food of the gods and basking in their immortal presence, he developed an utterly inappropriate and monumentally audacious lust for none other than Hera, Zeus's wife, the queen of the gods. This wasn't just poor form. This was hubris of the highest order. That classic Greek tragic flaw of overweening pride, arrogance, and a reckless disregard for the proper order of things. He didn't just fancy a goddess, he set his sights on the queen of all goddesses, the wife of his divine host and purifier. Okay, Ixion. Deep breaths. You're dining on Olympus, literally cleansed of murder by the king of the gods himself. Maybe don't try to secretly hit on his extremely powerful, notoriously jealous, and generally formidable wife. Some people, it seems, just cannot take a hint or even a massive life-altering gift of divine clemency. Zeus, of course, being the all-seeing king of the gods, was not oblivious to Ixion's inappropriate gazes and treacherous thoughts. You can just imagine his divine brow furrowing his celestial patience wearing thin. The initial pity he'd felt for Ixion likely began to curdle into a simmering, thunderous ire, but instead of immediately smiting the ungrateful mortal Zeus in his often complex divine wisdom, or perhaps his taste for elaborate ironic punishments, decided to test the true depths of Ixion's audacity. He began to formulate a plan, a trap, that would involve an illusion, a phantom made of the very air and mists of Olympus. Scholars often debate the original significance of Ixion's first shocking crime, the murder of his father-in-law. Was the myth primarily intended as a cautionary tale about the absolute sacredness of guest-host relations, Xenia, and the inviolability of kinship ties in ancient Greek society? Or did the story, with its fiery pit and treacherous feast, perhaps have even earlier chthonic underworld? Ritualistic undertones related to fire sacrifice and appeasing earth deities, which were only later moralized into a story about human transgression. Similarly, the exact reasons for Zeus's initial, surprising pity towards such a heinous murderer as Ixion are much discussed among classicists. Was it a genuine display of Olympian magnanimity, A calculated political move within the divine hierarchy? Or perhaps a reflection of an older, more archaic mythic layer, where Zeus's own actions and moral compass weren't always as pristine as later traditions might suggest? But whatever the deeper meanings, Ixion now stood on Olympus, his soul supposedly cleansed, but his desires running rampant and unchecked. Zeus watched his anger carefully veiled as this mortal who owed him everything, prepared to commit an even greater offense. The trap was being set, a trap that would involve something as ethereal and shape-shifting as a cloud, and which would ultimately lead to the birth of a creature just as paradoxical. The stage was now perfectly arranged for the creation of Nephili. So there you have Ixion, our deeply flawed king, dining on ambrosia among the glittering gods of Olympus, supposedly purified of his earthly crimes. Yet instead of quiet gratitude, his audacious heart is throbbing with an illicit desire for none other than Hera, the majestic and often rather formidable queen of heaven, and most importantly, the wife of his divine host, Zeus. Zeus, as we know, is not one to miss such blatant effrontery. His legendary temper is beginning to simmer, but rather than unleashing an immediate thunderbolt, which, let's be honest, was often his go-to solution for lesser offenses, he decides on a more cunning, more revealing, and ultimately more poetically just form of entrapment. He needs to be absolutely sure of Ixion's depravity to expose it in a way that leaves no doubt. And for this he conjures a phantom. Imagine Zeus, the king of gods and master of the skies, reaching out and gathering the very mists and vapors that swirl around the peaks of Mount Olympus. He takes these ethereal cloud stuffs. The Greek word for cloud nephos, or nepheli will become key here. And with his divine power, he begins to sculpt and mold them. He breathes a semblance of life into this atmospheric creation, shaping it with uncanny precision into a perfect, breathtaking likeness of his own queen Hera. This is Nephele, the cloud nymph, a phantom of a goddess. It's a central mainstream historical fact within Greek mythology that Nepheli was indeed a cloud entity. Her name directly derived from the Greek word for cloud, created by Zeus with the express purpose of deceiving and testing the presumptuous Ixion by appearing as an exact double of Hera. So Zeus, instead of just zapping Ixion with a well-aimed lightning bolt for inappropriately eyeing his wife, which frankly would have been much quicker, decides to go full divine Mission Impossible, crafting a highly realistic, life-sized Hera decoy entirely out of a convenient weather system. Talk about commitment to an elaborate sting operation. Nephili, therefore, is not a goddess in the traditional sense, nor is she a nymph born of streams or trees. She is an illusion, a divine construct animated by Zeus's will, a temporary being designed for a specific, rather unpleasant purpose. Her very essence is that of the clouds. Beautiful, yes, capable of mimicking form, but ultimately transient, lacking true substance and subject to the whims of the sky god who formed her. You can almost imagine her form subtly shifting her edges a little indistinct if you looked too closely, perhaps a faint scent of ozone or damp earth, clinging to her like the air before a summer storm. Once this exquisite cloud-spun decoy is complete, Zeus subtly arranges for Ixion to encounter Hera. Perhaps he contrives a situation where Ixion, emboldened by too much nectar and his own soaring arrogance, believes he has found Hera alone in a secluded grove on Olympus. Or maybe Zeus simply allows this phantom Hera to drift into Ixion's path, her appearance and demeanor so perfectly mimicking the queen that only the most discerning or least lust-addled observer would suspect a thing. And Ixion, poor hubristic fool, is anything but discerning at this point. Consumed by his illicit desires, blinded by his own audacity, he is utterly and completely duped. He sees this beautiful figure, the spitting image of the majestic Hera, apparently available to him, and his already questionable judgment flies out the Olympian window. He doesn't stop to question the implausibility of it all. Why would the Queen of Heaven suddenly be so receptive to the advances of a mere mortal, especially one with his rather dodgy track record? No, he sees only what his overwhelming lust wants him to see. Nephili, in this sense, becomes the original divine catfish. She looked exactly like Hera in her Olympian profile pic, which, to be fair to Ixion, was probably just a really well-shaped, divinely illuminated cumulonimbus cloud, The symbolic significance of Zeus choosing a cloud to create this double is quite potent. It perfectly mirrors the empty, illusory nature of Ixion's forbidden desire. He's not grasping for true love or even a genuine connection. He's reaching for a phantom, a mere image of his obsession. Something with no real substance, much like his own moral character and gratitude, which have proven to be equally vaporous. Clouds, after all, are the epitome of transience. They shift, they change, they form and dissipate, beautiful one moment, gone the next. They can promise rain and fertility, or they can gather into menacing storm fronts. This ephemeral, unpredictable quality makes Nephili a fitting instrument for Ixion's downfall. His ambition is like grasping at clouds a fool's errand. Some poetic fragments and later embellishments of the myth describe Nephili's gaze as being slightly misty and undefined, or her touch as having a distinct coolness and dampness, almost like a fine mist settling on the skin. These were perhaps subtle atmospheric clues that a more perceptive individual one, not so blinded by hubris, might have noticed hints that this hero was not quite of the same warm, divine flesh as the real queen. But Ixion, alas, was far too caught up in his own desires to register such delicate, ethereal warnings. You also have to wonder about the day-to-day practicalities and structural integrity of a being literally made of cloud stuff. Like what happens if a particularly strong gust of wind comes whistling through the halls of Olympus, does Nephili get a bit dispersed? So sorry Ixion Hera's feeling a bit scattered this afternoon. Literally, she seems to have drifted off towards the West Peak. Scholars sometimes debate whether Nephili, in the most ancient conception of this particular myth, was always intended as a mere insubstantial phantom, a divine special effect created ad hoc by Zeus for this specific deceit. Or they ponder, could she perhaps have roots as an older minor cloud or sky goddess? In her own right, a pre-existing deity from a more nature-based stratum of Greek belief, who was then cleverly incorporated into Ixion's escalating drama, specifically as Hera's illusory stand-in. The psychological implications of Ixion's profound delusion, his complete inability to distinguish the real formidable Hera from this compliant cloud clone, are also often discussed by classicists, typically in terms of unchecked narcissism, the corrupting influence of desire and the tragic blindness that so often afflicts those who overreach in Greek myth. But for now on Olympus, the trap is perfectly set. Zeus, the master manipulator, watches from the shadows, his anger carefully contained, as Ixion, oblivious to the divine machinations, approaches the beautiful, yielding phantom of Hera. The air is thick with unspoken tension, the scent of impending downfall, and perhaps just faintly the smell of rain. Ixion believes he is on the verge of the ultimate conquest, the ultimate transgression. He has no idea that he is about to embrace not a goddess, but a cool, damp, and divinely engineered illusion, a cloud that will seal his fate and, in a most unexpected way, father a monstrous new race. So there you have it. King Ixion, puffed up with divine ambrosia and an even more inflated sense of his own charm, stands before Nephili, the beautiful, ethereal cloud phantom, perfectly crafted by Zeus to resemble Queen Hera. He is entirely convinced he's about to achieve the ultimate romantic and treasonous conquest. Zeus, meanwhile, is likely lurking just off stage, perhaps behind a particularly grand Olympian pillar divine popcorn in hand, watching his elaborate atmospheric trap spring shut. What happens next is, even by the wild standards of Greek mythology, exceptionally peculiar, and it's the very heart of our sleepy question tonight. Blinded by his hubris and consumed by his illicit desire, Ixion makes his move. The ancient texts are generally quite discreet about the precise mechanics of a mortal man attempting to woo, or rather to force himself upon a being literally made of condensed water vapor and divine will. You can imagine it was probably a rather confusing and perhaps disappointingly damp experience for Ixion if he'd been in any state to notice. But notice he did not. He was convinced he had successfully consorted with Hera herself. So Ixion's big, audacious, romantic conquest, turns out it was with a very strategically deployed and presumably somewhat chilly weather formation. That's got to be a new and rather bewildering level of "it's complicated" for his celestial relationship status. Now, if Ixion had possessed even a shred of wisdom or discretion after this encounter, he might have kept quiet about it. But wisdom and Ixion were by this point residing in entirely different mythological postcodes. Far from being discreet, or perhaps even slightly bewildered by the unusual nature of his conquest, Ixion was so monumentally arrogant, so puffed up with his supposed triumph that he began to boast. He paraded around Olympus, or so the stories imply, bragging to anyone who would listen, and probably many who desperately wished they weren't listening, that he, a mere mortal, had successfully seduced Hera, the queen of the gods, the wife of Zeus. This for Zeus was the final unforgivable straw. The initial crime of lusting after Hera was bad enough. The act itself, even with a phantom, was worse. But to then boast about it, defiling Hera's name, and making a mockery of Zeus's hospitality and divine authority, that sealed Ixion's doom. Zeus's carefully contained fury now erupted. The king of the gods revealed the deception, showing Ixion the true cloudy nature of Nephili. Then, as punishment for his compounded crimes, the murder of his father-in-law, the violation of guest right on Olympus, the lust for Hera, the desecration of her image with a cloud, and his insufferable boasting, Ixion was famously bound to an eternally spinning fiery wheel, sometimes said to be in the heavens, sometimes in the depths of Tartarus, a perpetual monument to his hubris and ingratitude. But our story doesn't end with Ixion's fiery, dizzying fate. What of Nephili, the cloud clone? What became of that unnatural, cloud-kissed union? Well, according to the myths, Nephili did indeed conceive. And what she bore was the beginning of the Centaur race. Now it's a key mainstream historical fact, found in ancient sources like the poet Pindar's Pythian Ode II, and later detailed by mythographers such as Apollodorus, that the union of Ixion and Nephili resulted in a monstrous or problematic offspring. There are slightly different versions here. Some accounts say Nephili gave birth to a single misshapen being named Centaurus, or Kentauros in the Greek. This Centaurus was not himself a half-horse creature, but was described as an outcast shunned by both gods and men, who then wandered into the wild mountains of Thessaly. There on Mount Pelion, this original Centaurus is said to have mated with the local Magnesian mares, and it was from this second, equally strange union that the familiar race of half-man, half-horse centaurs was born. Other, perhaps later or simplified versions of the myth suggest that Nephili directly gave birth to the Centaur tribe, as we know them a whole herd of these hybrid beings, literally fathered by a man and mothered by a cloud. Imagine that first birth announcement. If such a thing existed on Olympus, it's well, it certainly got Ixion's legendary arrogance, and one presumes Nephili's inherent tendency to form hail under atmospheric pressure. We're provisionally calling him Centaurus, and he's already asking to borrow the sun chariot keys and complaining rather loudly about the excessive humidity in his nursery. If we consider the version where Nephili births a single entity named Centaurus, his nature would have been truly unique. A being caught between the human and the elemental, a direct product of illusion and transgression. He would be a living testament to his father's folly and his mother's ethereal, insubstantial nature. Some obscure ancient commentaries or scholias, those diligent scribes who wrote notes in the margins of classical texts, offer quirky tidbits suggesting that this original Centaurus, the son of Ixion and the Cloud, was perhaps born with a voice like rushing wind or distant rumbling thunder. Or maybe his skin had a strange, cool, damp quality. Constant, subtle reminders of his mother's airy, atmospheric essence, long before he ever encountered any Magnesian mares to sire his more famous half-horse descendants. These are, of course, later imaginative flourishes, but they capture the strangeness of his parentage. The very idea of a cloud-born monster, or a race of cloud-born beings, is rich with symbolism. It powerfully reflects the unnaturalness and profanity of Ixion's original crime of lusting after the queen of the gods. The offspring of such a deluded hubristic act is itself monstrous, or at least deeply problematic, and set apart from the normal order of beings. If the centaurs are born directly from Nephili, the cloud, they could be seen as inheriting her wild, untamable atmospheric nature, as unpredictable and potentially destructive as a sudden mountain storm, as elusive as mist. Scholars often debate whether the figure of Centaurus as a single distinct entity, who then goes on to father the centaur race by mating with mares, is perhaps an older, more layered version of the myth, with the idea of Nephili directly birthing the entire centaur tribe being a later simplification or poetic variation. The mythological trope of a single monstrous or semi-divine ancestor giving rise to a whole tribe of unique beings is quite common in many cultures. Furthermore, the exact mythological moment, or the precise reason for the equine part of the centaur to emerge from this initial cloud-human lineage, if we assume Centaurus himself wasn't initially horse-like, is a point of much fascinating speculation. Was the influence of those Magnesian mares the sole catalyst for the half-horse form? Or was there an inherent wildness, a connection to untamed nature derived from his cloud mother that somehow predestined this hybrid shape? It's one of those wonderfully murky mythological questions. But for now, the most crucial, most bizarre part of the equation is established: a mortal man, through an act of profound arrogance and deception, has coupled with a divinely crafted cloud. And from this strange, cloud-kissed union, something new and unsettling has been brought into the world. Whether it's a single monstrous progenitor named Centaurus or the first wave of the wild centaur tribe itself, their origin story is forever tied to this ethereal, atmospheric mother. It's a far cry from a simple tale of mistaken identity on the Thessalian plains, isn't it? Most awkward, who's really the father, and for that matter, who or what is the mother? Moment in all of Greek mythology. Well, I'm pretty sure it was me, Ixion, the famously boastful king. Unless, of course, that really was Hera I was with, in which case Zeus is about to turn me into a small, easily flammable garden shrub. Or, hang on a moment, was she just a little bit misty around the edges? The progeny of this cloud now exists, a testament to Ixion's folly. Our next step is to see how this strange offspring Centaurus, or his direct cloud-born brethren, go on to found the race of creatures we more readily recognize as centaurs. We've just witnessed a truly bizarre and pivotal moment on Mount Olympus, the audacious king. Ixion, completely fooled by Zeus's cunning, has united with Nephili, the phantom cloud, crafted in Hera's image. And from this strange cloud-kissed union, as the ancient myths tell us, an equally strange progeny was conceived, setting the stage for the birth of a notorious race. Let's now gently follow the story of this first offspring, often named Centaurus, and see how this son of a cloud became the monstrous sire of the wild centaur herd we more commonly picture. Now, in one of the primary versions of this tangled family tree, particularly the one that traces its roots back to the poet Pindar Nephili, the cloud nymph doesn't directly give birth to a whole tribe of half-horse creatures. Instead, she bears a single unique offspring from her forced union with Ixion. This being is named Centaurus, or Kentauros in the Greek. It's important to imagine that this Centaurus, this original son of a cloud and a disgraced king, was likely not himself the familiar half-man, half-horse hybrid. No, he was something else. Something of a transitional figure, being marked by his unnatural and scandalous parentage. The ancient texts often describe him as monstrous, wild, lawless, and outcast from both divine and ordered human society. He inherited his father, Ixion's arrogance and disregard for propriety, and perhaps from his mother Nephili, a certain untamable, restless, and ephemeral quality, like a storm cloud that refuses to be contained. Shunned by gods and men, he was a creature truly belonging to no civilized world. So Centaurus, with delusional king for a father and sentient weather system for a mother, his career options back in civilized society were probably somewhat limited. Monster who lives alone on a remote mountain and consorts with wild horses seems to be the rather niche profession he eventually settled into. Not a great entry on the old LinkedIn profile, one imagines. Rejected and alone, this Centaurus. This product of divine wrath and mortal folly eventually found his way to the rugged, untamed slopes of Mount Pelion in a region of Thessaly called Magnesia. This was a wild, mountainous area fitting for such an outcast, and it is here amidst these wild pastures that the next crucial and equally strange step in the lineage of the centaurs occurs. Centaurus, this monstrous son of Ixion and Nephili, is said to have mated with the local Magnesian mares, the wild, untamed female horses that roamed these mountains. It's a key mainstream historical fact within these mythological narratives, particularly those stemming from Pindar's influential account, that Centaurus himself is not a centaur in the classic half-horse sense, but rather a monstrous or socially outcast individual who then mates with these Magnesian mares on Mount Pelion. And it is specifically their offspring, the children of Centaurus and these wild horses who are born as the classical half-human, half-horse centaurs that gallop so vividly through Greek mythology. This union effectively introduces the crucial equine element into the lineage. The Magnesian mares themselves must have had very eclectic taste in partners. Oh, look, a brooding, outcast son of a cloud nymph looking rather windswept and socially awkward. Definitely my type. Love, or perhaps just untamed nature, works in mysterious ways even for mythical Greek horses. The symbolism here is quite potent. You have the first stage man Ixion plus cloud Nephili results in a monstrous man-like being Centaurus. Then the second stage, this monstrous man-like being Centaurus. Plus animal Magnesian mares results in the man-animal hybrids, the Centaur race. It's like a doubling down on wildness, a progressive step further away from ordered human society and the divine realm of Olympus with each generation. The Magnesian mares themselves were likely seen as symbols of untamed nature, wild, free-roaming creatures of the mountains, perfectly suited to mother such a savage and unruly race. It's worth briefly acknowledging that other, perhaps later or more simplified versions of the myth have Nephili, the cloud mother, directly giving birth to the Centaur tribe as fully formed half-horse beings after her encounter with Ixion. In this interpretation, their wildness and their distinctive horse nature are more immediately and directly tied to their cloud mother and the unnatural circumstances of their conception. Perhaps in this version, the cloud form impregnated by Ixion's hubris condensed or precipitated directly into these hybrid shapes creatures of both sky stuff and illicit human passion. Regardless of whether they sprang directly from Nephele or were sired by her son Centaurus, the resulting Centaur race inherited a legacy of wildness. They were generally characterized by their lawlessness, their potent, often uncontrolled desires, especially for wine and women, which frequently got them into trouble, and their propensity for violence. Their primary home, Mount Pelion, became synonymous with their untamed bestial nature, a place apart from the civilized polis or city-state of the Greeks. A quirky tidbit that sometimes emerges from obscure local Thessalian myths or poetic allusions suggests that the Magnesian mares with whom Centaurus, or perhaps even Ixion himself in some very tangled variants coupled, were no ordinary horses. Some whispered that these were not merely wild horses, but were themselves supernaturally swift. Perhaps descended from steeds sired by Boreas, the fierce north wind, or were sacred to some primal earth deity of the mountains, making their offspring, the centaurs, creatures infused not just with the essence of cloud and human folly, but also with the untamable spirit of the wind and the wild earth. This would make them even more profoundly creatures of raw, elemental nature. Scholars often debate whether the specific choice of Magnesian mares for Centaurus's mates in the dominant Pindaric version has a deeper geographical or cultic significance. Could it be linked to early horse breeding cults or traditions in the Magnesian region of Thessaly, a place known for its horses? Or was Mares of Pelion simply a poetic way of signifying the wildest, most untamed equine stock? Imaginable the perfect raw material for siring such a notoriously savage and bestial race. Furthermore, the exact nature of Centaurus's monstrosity, if he was indeed the intermediate step, is open to interpretation based on the often scant and varying ancient descriptions of his specific appearance. Was his monstrosity a physical deformity, a result of his bizarre parentage, or was it primarily a reflection of his behavioral wildness and his status as a social outcast shunned by all? Imagine the birth of that first true centaur foal if we follow the Centaurus and mares lineage. Darling, one Magnesian mare might have whinnied to another, "He's got his father." Centaurus's distinctly human-looking torso and arms, and my powerful equine hindquarters. And already he seems to have a worrying obsession with trying to ferment wild berries, and a rather aggressive approach to claiming the best grazing spots. I think we've inadvertently created a whole new category of rather problematic and overly hairy teenager. And so, from a king's arrogance, a god's wrath, and a mother made of cloud through a monstrous intermediary, and a herd of wild mountain mares, the familiar figure of the centaur, half man, half horse, finally gallops into the mythological landscape. Their origin is a tangled tale of deception, transgression, and bizarre unions forever marking them as creatures caught between worlds, embodying both the potential for human reason and the untamed chaos of nature. Our next step is to explore the general character and reputation of this wild herd that now populates the slopes of Mount Pelion. We've just witnessed the rather perplexing mythological birds and the bees talk ancient Greek style that led to the creation of the Centaur race. Whether they were the direct cloud-born offspring of Ixion and the phantom Nephili, or the grandchildren of this union via the monstrous outcast Centaurus and his wild Magnesian mare consorts, the result was the same: a new hybrid race was now thundering across the mythological landscape. And their primary stomping ground, their ancestral homeland, was the rugged, untamed wilderness of Mount Pelion in Thessaly. So let's you and I take a cautious imaginary trek up those forested slopes and encounter this notorious wild herd. Mount Pelion, a majestic tree-clad mountain that looms over the Pagasetic Gulf in Thessaly, was the perfect, almost archetypal home for these creatures of untamed nature. Imagine its deep forests, its hidden glades, its rocky outcrops and rushing streams. A landscape far removed from the ordered cultivated fields and bustling city-states of the civilized Greeks. This was Centaur territory, a place where the rules of men held little sway. And what of the centaurs themselves, this wild herd of Pelion? Their physical form is of course the one we know so well. The powerful muscular body of a horse from the waist down, seamlessly merging into the torso, arms, and head of a man. This gave them both the brute strength and speed of a horse and the cunning and manipulative ability of a human. But it was their general behavior, their collective character, that truly defined them in Greek myth. Overwhelmingly, the centaurs of Pelion were depicted as savage, lawless, and thoroughly bestial. They were driven by primal instincts, quick to anger and prone to violence. Their motto was probably something along the lines of, "Born of a cloud, sired by an outcast who consorted with wild horses on a remote mountain." What exactly did you expect from us, a PhD in advanced philosophy and impeccable table manners? Fair point, really. They lived a life divorced from the trappings of Greek civilization. You wouldn't find them tilling fields or engaging in reasoned debate in the agora. No, they were creatures of the wilderness, dwelling in caves or rough shelters in the deep forests, perhaps living as hunters and gatherers, or at best very rudimentary pastoralists. Their society, if you could call it that, was likely a loose, unruly band, governed by strength and impulse rather than by laws or refined customs. The centaurs of Pelion became notorious for several rather unflattering traits, all of which seemed to stem from their problematic ancestry. That potent cocktail of Ixion's hubris, Nephili's unnatural cloud essence, and Centaurus's outcast rage. Chief among these failings was their legendary inability to handle wine. Give a centaur a cup of unmixed wine, the Greeks usually diluted theirs with water, and all hell was likely to break loose. They were also infamous for their unbridled lustfulness, which often manifested in a terrifying propensity for abducting women. And as a general rule, they were quick to violence, preferring brute force and crude weapons like rocks and tree branches to more sophisticated forms of combat or diplomacy. The most famous myth illustrating all these charming characteristics in one catastrophic package is the Centauromachy, the epic battle between the Lapiths, a neighboring Thessalian tribe ironically often considered kinsmen to the centaurs through Ixion, or his descendants and the centaurs. It's a prominent mainstream historical fact, depicted countless times in Greek art, from temple pediments like the Parthenon to humble vase paintings, and recounted in literature, that this monumental brawl was triggered by the centaur's drunken and violent behavior at the wedding feast of the Lapith king Pirate House and his bride Hippodamia. Invited as guests, the centaurs, unused to wine, quickly became intoxicated. Their leader Eurytion, overcome with lust, attempted to carry off the bride, and the other centaurs following his lead began assaulting the Lapith women and boys. A furious battle ensued, a brutal, bloody conflict that became a powerful symbol in Greek culture for the eternal struggle between civilization represented by the Lapiths and barbarism embodied by the centaurs. Inviting a Pelion centaur to your wedding, a very bold and probably very regrettable move. It's rather like inviting a hungry, slightly unpredictable bear to a sophisticated garden picnic, and then being utterly shocked when it not only eats all the delicate cucumber sandwiches, but also the picnic basket, most of the decorative flowers, and possibly makes an unwelcome pass at your cousin Terry. They really needed a good event planner, a designated non-drinker, and perhaps some group anger management sessions. Their wild, untamed nature is often seen as an embodiment of uncontrolled natural forces. Perhaps that distant cloud. Grandmother Nephele passed down more than just a strange origin story. Maybe she imbued her descendants with the unpredictable, sometimes tempestuous, and always untamable spirit of a mountain storm. They were the antithesis of the ordered, rational ideal of the Greek polis. A quirky tidbit that surfaces in some lesser-known local tales or fragmented myths concerns the more intimate connection of certain Pelian centaurs with their wild environment. There were whispers in the remote mountain villages of Thessaly that some of the more reclusive older centaurs, those who rarely descended to trouble mankind, possessed an almost preternatural understanding of the wilderness. They were said to be able to interpret the rustling speech of the ancient oak trees, or predict the coming of fierce mountain storms simply by the taste of the wind on their tongues or the behavior of the wild eagles. A strange, almost shamanistic echo of their grandmother Nephele's cloudy atmospheric essence. It adds a touch of wild magic to their otherwise rather thuggish reputation. Scholars often debate the deeper cultural meanings behind the predominantly negative portrayal of this main centaur tribe. Was their savagery and otherness primarily a way for the Greeks to define their own Hellenic identity? Their concept of civilization by creating a clear, barbarian other against which to measure themselves? Or could the myth perhaps reflect in a highly distorted and mythologized form genuine historical encounters with rough, less civilized mountain tribes dwelling on the fringes of emerging Greek society people whose ways seemed alien and threatening? Furthermore, the centaur's notorious inability to handle wine, was this simply a convenient plot device used by ancient storytellers to instigate conflict and chaos? Or does it perhaps symbolize a deeper cultural anxiety about the intoxicating and socially disruptive power of Dionysian forces? The wild energies of passion and ecstasy, if they are not properly managed and integrated within a civilized framework, so as you picture this wild herd thundering across the slopes of Mount Pelion, try to sense the raw, untamed energy that surrounded them. Imagine the pungent scent of pine needles and damp earth, the echoing sound of their unshod hooves on rocky paths, the raucous, guttural cries of their band as they hunt or revel the glint of crude, improvised weapons, and the undeniable wildness in their eyes. A wildness born perhaps from a lineage that stretched back to an arrogant king and an ephemeral cloud. Having established their generally unruly nature, we'll soon delve into the very names of these creatures, seeking clues in etymology before we meet a most notable exception to this savage rule. We've just spent some time in the wild, untamed company of the Pelion centaurs, that notorious herd known for their love of chaos, their unfortunate reactions to wine, and their generally beastly behavior. A legacy perhaps of their strange and scandalous origins from King Ixion, a cloud nymph, and some rather surprised Magnesian mares. But sometimes the names themselves can hold clues, little linguistic breadcrumbs that might lead us back to the heart of a myth. So let's now gently sift through the ancient Greek words for centaur and cloud, Centauros and Nephele, and see if their very roots can tell us anything more about this bizarre rain cloud theory. Are there hidden meanings in these names that might hint at an atmospheric ancestry? Let's start with the easier one, Nephele Nephele. As we've already touched upon, her name is quite straightforward. In ancient Greek, Nephele and the related word nephos literally means cloud or mist. There's no real ambiguity here. When Zeus decided to create a phantom Hera to trick Ixion, he chose the very essence of the sky's vaporous cloak and named her accordingly. So, Nephele is by her very name a creature of the air, an atmospheric being. This part of the story aligns perfectly and directly with our rain cloud question. She is unequivocally the cloud in this equation. So far, so good. Nephele means cloud. Nice and simple, easy to remember. Centauros, her son, or the race she mothered well. His name is a little more complicated. It's like an ancient family naming convention. One child gets a lovely, straightforward name like Sunny, and the other gets saddled with something like existential dread, possibly involving cat. TL or perhaps vague atmospheric disturbance CES? Now let's turn to Kentauros Kentavros, the Greek word for centaur. This is where things get a bit more speculative and linguistically intriguing. The ancient Greeks themselves and many scholars since have proposed a few possible derivations. The most common and widely cited folk etymology, one that you'll find in many classical dictionaries and commentaries, breaks the word down into two parts. Kenteo kendeo, meaning to pierce, to prick, to goad, or to spur, and tauros taros, meaning bull. So kentauros would mean bull piercer or bull goader. This interpretation could fit with the image of centaurs as wild pastoral beings living in Thessaly, a region known for its cattle. Perhaps they were originally mythologized as skilled but rough cattle herders or even cattle rustlers. Or maybe it alluded to some ancient forgotten ritual involving bulls that was practiced in the mountainous regions where centaur myths were prevalent. So, if Kentauros primarily means bull piercer, given their notorious tendency to crash parties and start brawls, this probably implies they weren't just surprisingly adept at ancient rodeo. They were also experts at metaphorically and perhaps literally taking the bull by the horns, and then possibly using said horns as improvised weaponry. Classy. But what if there are other ways to interpret kenteo? The verb does mean to pierce or to goad. Could it be combined with something else? Some more imaginative, though less mainstream etymologies have played with other possibilities. One rather poetic suggestion, though not widely accepted by linguists, tries to link kenteo with aura aura, a word meaning breeze or air. This would give us something like piercer of the air, or one who goads the breeze. Now this is interesting for our sleepy investigation, isn't it? If their mother Nephele is a cloud, then a name that suggests piercing the air or riding the breeze could be a subtle poetic nod to their atmospheric lineage, or perhaps to their incredible swiftness as if they were one with the wind. It could imply creatures who move like a sudden gust, or whose very nature is tied to the turbulent, airy realm of their cloud mother. If Kentauros involves piercing the air, maybe they were just incredibly, astonishingly fast runners, literally parting the breeze as they galloped. Or perhaps it refers to their wild cries being as sharp and cutting as a northern wind, especially when they were complaining, as they so often did, about the quality or quantity of the wine service at someone else's wedding. However, it's important to state as a mainstream linguistic fact that while the precise etymology of Kentauros remains uncertain and debated, the most widely accepted interpretation both in antiquity and among modern philologists connects it to the idea of bull piercer or bull goader. Alternative suggestions like those linking to air, or even some attempts to find cognates with figures like the Gandharvas horse-headed celestial beings from Hindu mythology through complex Indo-European linguistic reconstructions, are generally considered more speculative or on the fringe for the specific Greek context. What about Ixion himself? Does his name, Ixion, Ixion, offer any clues to this cloudy conundrum? Unfortunately, the etymology of Ixion is also uncertain. Some ancient writers tried to link it to the Greek word ixis, ixis meaning loins or strength, perhaps hinting at his potent, uncontrolled desires. Others have connected it to Hykasios Ikasios, meaning suppliant, which would be deeply ironic given his treacherous behavior after Zeus received him as a suppliant. Neither of these common suggestions directly illuminates the cloud aspect of his offspring, but the ambiguity itself is perhaps fitting for such a morally murky character. A quirky tidbit from the world of ancient etymological speculation is how creative some commentators could be. While not a mainstream theory for Kentauros, you can find examples in ancient scholia. Those notes written by later scholars in the margins of classical texts where all sorts of imaginative, if not always linguistically sound derivations, were proposed for obscure mythological names. One rather imaginative, though entirely unsubstantiated, ancient commentator once tried to derive Kentauros not from Tauros bull, but from Uros uros, which can mean a fair wind or a guardian, suggesting centaurs were piercers of the favorable wind, or even guardians who sting. It's a delightful stretch showing how much these names could spark the imagination, even if it doesn't quite hold up to modern linguistic scrutiny. Another more plausible yet still interpretive ancient understanding of bull piercer, suggested it didn't refer to them literally hunting bulls with spears, but rather metaphorically to the centaurs piercing or violently disrupting the established social norms in order the bulwark of society with their consistently wild and lawless behavior. The true original etymology of Centauros thus remains a subject of considerable linguistic debate with no single universally accepted derivation that satisfies all scholars. While bull piercer is certainly the frontrunner due to thematic links with Thessalian pastoral life or ancient bull-related myths and rituals, the evidence isn't absolutely conclusive. This leaves a little tantalizing room for other interpretations, even if they are more poetic that might seek to connect their name more directly to their wild, untamable nature, or perhaps even if one is feeling particularly dreamy tonight to that strange atmospheric connection through their mother Nephili the cloud. So while Nephili's name clearly anchors her to the sky, the name of her progeny Centauros is more stubbornly terrestrial, in its most common interpretation pointing to bulls and earthly pursuits rather than misty heights. It seems the linguistic clues for a direct cloud connection in the name Centauros are as elusive and hard to grasp as a cloud itself. But the very ambiguity keeps the mystery alive. Having sifted these word roots, let's next broaden our view and see if the wider world of ancient Greek sky creatures and storm myths can shed any more light on beings born from or associated with the ever-shifting clouds. We've just been wrestling with the rather slippery etymology of Centauros, finding that its most common interpretation as bull piercer doesn't immediately scream son of a cloud, even if his mother Nephele's name is as clear as a summer sky. The linguistic trail for a direct cloud connection in the name of the centaur himself seems a bit, well, misty. So if the words themselves don't offer us a smoking or perhaps raining gun, let's broaden our gaze. Let's drift up into the mythological atmosphere of ancient Greece and see if the wider world of sky creatures, weather deities, and storm myths can offer a more supportive climate for our original centaur was a rain cloud theory. If these notorious half-horse hybrids truly have an atmospheric ancestry, were there other similar beings frolicking or perhaps rampaging among the cumulus and nimbus of Greek imagination? First, it's essential to remember that for the ancient Greeks, the sky wasn't just empty space. It was the primary domain of the most powerful gods. Zeus, or Jupiter to the Romans, was the supreme sky father, the cloud gatherer, the wielder of thunderbolts. The weather itself, the rain, the wind, the lightning, the sunshine, was often seen as a direct expression of divine will, mood, or intervention. So the idea of the sky birthing or being involved in the creation of unique beings isn't as far-fetched as it might initially sound to us. The Greeks were masters at personifying natural forces, and weather phenomena were no exception. Think of the anemoi, the wind gods. There was Boreas, the fierce north wind, often depicted as a powerful winged man with a wild beard, sometimes even with equine attributes, or said to be capable of siring horses, swift as the wind itself. Then there was Zephyrus, the gentle west wind of spring, Notus, the stormy south wind, and Eurus, the less clearly defined east wind. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were characters with personalities, parentage, and roles in various myths. The fact that winds, these invisible but powerful forces of the air, could be imagined as winged men or even connected to horses already gives us a precedent for atmospheric beings having a touch of the equine or the hybrid about them. So sky horses were already a thing in the Greek imagination. Maybe our centaurs were just the result of a particularly ambitious cloud nymph like Nephele and a very gusty wind horse getting a bit too friendly at an Olympian weather-themed celestial party. Purely speculative, of course, but it shows the imaginative connections being made. Then you have creatures like the harpies, those rather unpleasant bird women with a penchant for snatching food and sometimes people. Their name itself means snatchers, and they were often directly associated with storm winds embodying the sudden destructive fury of a squall. And don't forget Iris, the beautiful messenger goddess who personified the rainbow, that most ephemeral and lovely of atmospheric phenomena, literally bridging the gap between heaven and earth with her arc of color. Clouds themselves, the Nepheli, held a significant place. It's a well-established mainstream historical fact within Greek mythology that clouds were frequently personified as nymphs, the Nepheli often considered daughters of the great Okeanos ocean, and Tethys, the titaness of fresh water, or sometimes of ether, the pure upper air. These cloud nymphs were seen as attendants of the major Olympian gods, particularly Zeus, who famously gathered the clouds, and Hera. They played roles in various myths. Our Nephili, the one Zeus fashioned into Hera's likeness to trick Ixion, is the most famous example directly relevant to our story. But there was also another Nephile, a different cloud nymph, who, in a separate myth, heroically rescued the children, Phrixus and Helle, from sacrifice by sending them the wondrous golden ram, which flew them away to safety, well, safety for Phrixus at least. So clouds could be saviors as well as sources of deception and monstrous births. Beyond gentle nymphs, the sheer power and terror of storms could easily be imagined as monstrous entities. Think of Typhon, the colossal multi-headed storm giant, a son of Gaia Earth and Tartarus the underworld, who waged a cataclysmic battle against Zeus for supremacy of the cosmos. Typhon was the very embodiment of volcanic fury and hurricane-force winds, a creature of ultimate chaos. While not a cloud per se, he represented the sky's most destructive and monstrous potential. The general terrifying chaos and the overwhelming unpredictable power of a great storm could easily lead ancient peoples to imagine such forces as vast, shadowy, and monstrous beings lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary world. So if you saw a really dark, angry-looking, swirling storm cloud gathering over the mountains in ancient Greece, you wouldn't just think, better bring in the laundry and check the roof tiles. You might legitimately think, uh-oh, Zeus is having a major disagreement with someone again. Or maybe Nephili's really bad-tempered great uncle, the Storm Titan, is coming for a visit. This connection to wild, untamed atmospheric power resonates rather well with the general character of the Pelion Centaurs. If their ultimate ancestor was a cloud, specifically one born from an act of deception and divine anger, then their lawless, violent, and unpredictable nature seems almost an inherited trait. They would be like living tempests, their passions as sudden and destructive as a thunderclap, their desires as overwhelming as a flash flood. Their preferred habitat, the wild mountains where storms often brew and mists cling to the peaks, also feels fitting for creatures with such an airy, tempestuous lineage. Imagine a divine weather report for their home region. Today's forecast for Mount Pelion and surrounding areas generally cloudy with a high chance of unruly centaur gatherings, probably escalating to scattered brawls by late afternoon, followed by a 70% probability of someone attempting to abduct a lapith. Standard atmospheric conditions, really. A quirky tidbit that further illustrates the imaginative connection between divinities. The atmosphere and unusual progeny is found in various minor myths, where gods seduce mortals by taking on elemental forms. For example, Zeus famously approached Danae as a shower of golden rain, resulting in the hero Perseus. While not a cloud, it's another instance of a sky god using an atmospheric phenomenon for a romantic or at least procreative encounter. Other tales might speak of a nymph being pursued by a river god who manifests as a flood, or a mortal woman being visited by a powerful gust of wind that leaves her pregnant with a hero swift as the breeze. The ancient Greeks were clearly comfortable with the idea of the elements themselves playing an active, even intimate role in the creation of extraordinary beings. Indeed, the aforementioned Aristophanes in his play, The Birds, even has his characters found a fantastical city in the sky called Nephalokakigia, Cloud Cuckoo Land, showing a playful yet deeply ingrained imaginative engagement with clouds as a realm of strange possibilities, new creations, and perhaps even a touch of delightful madness. Scholars often debate the extent to which such meteorological myths like the story of Nephili, or the personification of winds, sometimes having equine characteristics like Boreas siring. Superfast horses reflect genuine early attempts by ancient peoples to explain complex weather phenomena through narrative. Were these myths a form of proto-science, an effort to make sense of the powerful, often frightening forces of nature by giving them personalities and stories? Or did they serve primarily as moral or allegorical tales, with the meteorological elements being more symbolic or metaphorical backdrops for human and divine dramas about hubris, justice, and passion? It's likely a rich blend of both, with the stories evolving over time, layering scientific observation with poetic fancy and profound philosophical meaning. So while the specific idea of a half-man, half-horse creature being directly born from a cloud and a man might be unique to the Ixion and Nephili story, the broader mythological landscape of ancient Greece was certainly populated with other sky creatures. personified wind's cloud nymphs and storm giants. The sky was a busy, often dramatic place full of divine agency and the potential for extraordinary, sometimes monstrous creation. Nephili as a cloud-given form fits comfortably within this tradition. The next question then is how this cloud-born lineage reconciles with that other popular theory for the Centaur's origin, the idea that they were simply a case of mistaken identity. We've just been soaring through the rather imaginative skies of ancient Greek mythology, exploring a whole host of atmospheric beings, from wind gods who sometimes took on horse-like forms to personified rainbows and of course our very own cloud nymph Nephili. This context certainly makes the idea of a creature having some connection to the sky, to clouds or to storms feel a little less outlandish within their mythological framework. However, for every fantastical, God-breathed explanation the ancient Greeks concocted, there's often a more down-to-earth rationalizing theory that tries to find a logical, real-world kernel of truth hidden within the myth. And for the Centaur, one of the most persistent and appealing of these rational theories is the riders on the horizon idea. The suggestion that these half-man, half-horse creatures were born not from a cloud, but from a simple, if profound, misunderstanding. So let's gently descend from the misty peaks of Mount Olympus and plant our feet for a moment in the realm of plausible human experience. This mistaken identity theory, which was actually proposed by some pragmatic ancient writers like Palaphadus, and has been favored by many modern scholars, suggests that the myth of the Centaur might have originated from the very first encounters of a people unfamiliar with widespread horsemanship when they saw skilled riders from another culture. Imagine yourself as an early Greek villager, perhaps someone from a community where horses were primarily used for pulling chariots, or as pack animals not commonly ridden with great expertise, especially not in warfare or for long-distance travel. Then one day, appearing on the distant horizon, or perhaps thundering suddenly into your valley, comes a group of warriors or travelers from a different land, perhaps Scythians from the vast steppes to the north, known for their incredible cavalry skills, or Thracians, or even just a particularly well-trained troop of horsemen from a neighboring Greek region like Thessaly, which was, as we've noted, famous for its horses even in ancient times. To your unaccustomed eyes, especially from a distance or in the chaotic dust and confusion of a skirmish, the sight of a human rider seemingly fused with their powerful steed, moving as one fluid, fast, and formidable entity could be utterly bewildering. The upper body of the man, the powerful lower body of the horse. It might not be too great a leap of imagination in that moment of awe or fear to perceive them not as two separate beings, but as a single, previously unknown hybrid creature. So the Centaur myth could just be the ancient world's most epic oops. My sincere apologies upon closer inspection. It appears that was just a particularly skilled chap from Thrace on his rather impressive pony, not a terrifying man-beast moment. Imagine the first Greek shepherd breathlessly running back to his village. By Zeus's sacred beard, I've just seen a man-horse, a creature of nightmare. Tell everyone. And his slightly more skeptical friend leaning on his crook just goes, "You quite sure that wasn't just, Farmer Philippos from the next valley over, trying out that new horse he bought at the market? Maybe looking a bit wobbly, Barry." This theory has a certain straightforward appeal, doesn't it? It offers a logical, almost scientific explanation for such a bizarre and striking mythical hybrid. It neatly sidesteps the need for divine trickery cloud phantoms and rather questionable interspecies breeding programs on Mount Pelion. It also aligns with known historical realities. The Greeks did indeed have contact, both peaceful and hostile, with various horse riding cultures on their peripheries. It is a well-supported mainstream historical fact that a prominent rationalizing explanation for the Centaur myth, often cited by both ancient commentators like Palaphadus and numerous modern scholars, suggests that the striking image of the Centaur likely originated from the initial perception of non-horse riding or less equestrian-savvy cultures when they first encountered highly skilled mounted warriors such as the nomadic Scythians or the renowned Thessalian cavalry. The seamless unity of rider and horse, especially when seen in rapid motion or from afar, could easily have given rise to the idea of a single composite being. This mistaken identity theory can also help explain some of the Centaur's traditional characteristics. If these first encountered horsemen were indeed foreigners or from less settled nomadic tribes, They might well have been perceived by the more agriculturally settled Greeks as wild, unruly, or barbaric, in the ancient Greek sense of simply being non-Greek speaking or culturally different. This perception could then translate into the myth of the centaurs as lawless, savage beings. Furthermore, nomadic horsemen were often highly skilled with bows and arrows, or javelins, weapons frequently associated with centaurs in myth and art. However, like any theory, it has its potential weaknesses or aspects it doesn't fully explain. While it provides a plausible origin for the image of a man-horse, it doesn't easily account for the rich and very specific mythological narrative surrounding Ixian Hera and Nephil the Cloud. Why invent such an elaborate, scandalous, and frankly bizarre divine backstory if the centaur was simply a case of misinterpreting some guys on horseback? And why would only some encounters with foreign horsemen generate such a potent and enduring myth? The Greeks encountered many different peoples. Why didn't they develop myths of elephant men after seeing war elephants or camel men from desert caravans, though, to be fair, other hybrid creatures certainly do exist in their mythology for different reasons. This theory then is basically saying that centaurs were primarily an ancient optical illusion, a bit like seeing familiar faces or animals in the shapes of clouds, except this particular cloud is armed with a hefty spear and is charging directly at you. Slightly more alarming, one would imagine. The central role of Thessaly, particularly the region around Mount Pelion in centaur myths, is also interesting. Thessaly was renowned in ancient Greece for its horses and its skilled cavalry. This could support the mistaken horseman theory, if we imagine people from other parts of Greece less familiar with such advanced horsemanship encountering Thessalian riders. Or conversely, it could simply mean that if you were going to invent a myth about horse-like beings horse-rich, Thessaly would be the most natural and fitting legendary habitat for them. A quirky tidbit that often comes up in discussions of this theory is a much later but historically documented parallel from the Spanish conquest of the Americas. When the Aztec warriors of Mexico, who had never before seen horses, first encountered the Spanish conquistadors on horseback. In the 16th century, some initial accounts suggest they were utterly terrified, believing the rider and horse to be a single, monstrous, almost supernatural entity. This striking historical parallel, though centuries removed from ancient Greece, is often cited by proponents of the mistaken identity theory as evidence for how such a perception could realistically arise. Scholars as always continue to debate how much weight to give this mistaken horseman theory versus purely mythological, symbolic, or even ritualistic interpretations of the centaur myth. While it offers an appealingly rational explanation for the hybrid form, it doesn't fully satisfy all aspects of the rich and complex narratives, particularly the very specific and unusual story of Ixion and Nephili. This suggests to many that the centaur myth, like so many enduring legends, likely has a composite origin, woven from multiple threads of experience, imagination, and cultural memory. Furthermore, the exact historical timeline for when the Greeks would have been so unfamiliar with accomplished horse riding as to widely mistake rider and horse is also a point of ongoing discussion, as horsemanship, while perhaps not universally practiced by all Greeks from the earliest times, was certainly present and developing in the Aegean world from a relatively early Bronze Age period. So, if this riders on the horizon theory holds water, then the original centaur was perhaps just a really skilled and possibly rather intimidating equestrian, who perhaps forgot to dismount before introducing himself to new people. Greetings, I am Og from the northern steppes, and this is also a significant part of me, my trusty steed Thunderhoof. Together we are Og and Thunderhoof. Nice to meet you. Must have made formal handshakes and dinner party invitations rather awkward. We now have two quite different, yet equally intriguing origin stories for our centaurs, one born from a divine trick involving a cloud and another from a possible real-world case of mistaken identity. How do these two narratives sit alongside each other? Can they be reconciled? Or do they represent entirely different layers of meaning and belief that became attached to these fascinating creatures over time? That's something to ponder as we move forward. We've just been mulling over that rather down-to-earth theory for the origin of centaurs. The idea that these mythical half-man, half-horse beings might have sprung from a simple case of mistaken identity, a kind of ancient optical illusion when non-horse-riding Greeks first encountered skilled mounted warriors. It's a neat rational explanation that certainly accounts for their hybrid form. But then how does it sit alongside that wild, woolly, and distinctly less rational myth of Ixion? his lust for Hera, and the cloud phantom Nephili, giving birth to a monstrous lineage. The truth, as with most enduring myths, is likely a rich, complex tapestry woven from many different threads. However, before we try to untangle all of that, it's crucial to meet a very particular centaur who breaks almost all the molds, a noble exception to the generally unruly rule, the wise and gentle Chiron. When you hear the word centaur, your mind probably conjures up images of those wild, often drunken and belligerent creatures we encountered, rampaging on Mount Pelion, the ones with a penchant for crashing weddings and generally causing mayhem. But Chiron, or Chiron in Greek, was a world apart from his boisterous cloud-descended or mare-sired brethren. He was renowned throughout the ancient Greek world, not for his savagery, but for his profound wisdom. His gentle nature, his exceptional skills in medicine, music, archery, hunting, and even prophecy. He was in essence the good centaur, the one you would actually invite to your wedding confident that he'd probably bring a thoughtful, handcrafted gift. Perhaps play some lovely soothing music on the lyre during the reception, and offer sage advice to the happy couple instead of, attempting to ride off with the catering staff or start a brawl over the last jug of wine. So, what made Chiron so different? Why was he a beacon of civility and learning, while most of his half-horsekin were, to put it mildly, a public relations nightmare for the entire centaur species? The key lies in his parentage, his very different origin story. It's a fundamental mainstream historical fact within Greek mythology that unlike the main tribe of centaurs who, as we've explored, were said to be descended from the transgressive union of Ixion and the cloud nymph Nephili, or from their son Centaurus and the Magnesian mares, Chiron boasted a far more ancient and august lineage. His father was none other than Cronus, the mighty Titan, who ruled the cosmos before Zeus and the Olympians came to power. And his mother was Philyra, a beautiful Oceanid, a nymph of the sea. The story of Chiron's conception is, like many divine unions, a bit unconventional. Cronus, it is said, desired the nymph Philyra to pursue her as she was apparently trying to evade his attentions by transforming into a mare, or perhaps to hide his amorous activities from his formidable wife. Rhea Cronus himself took on the form of a magnificent stallion. From this union between the Titan as stallion and the nymph as mare, or just the nymph, depending on the version Chiron was born. And because of this equine transformation at the moment of his conception, Chiron emerged into the world as a centaur half-human, half-horse. This divine Titan-nymph parentage, so different from the tainted lineage of Ixion, is often cited by ancient writers and modern scholars as the primary reason for Chiron's superior wisdom, his innate goodness, and his initially immortal nature. He wasn't cut from the same stormy, illusory cloudcloth as the others, so to speak. This distinct origin neatly explains why Chiron stood in such stark contrast to the wild centaurs of Pelion. Their ancestry was rooted in hubris, deception, and a problematic union with wild animals leading to a legacy of lawlessness and bestial behavior. Chiron's, on the other hand, stemmed from powerful, if archaic, divine and nature spirits imbuing him with a more profound connection to wisdom and the benevolent aspects of the natural world. Chiron made his home in a cave on Mount Pelion, the same mountainous region roamed by his wilder cousins. But his cave wasn't a den of savage revelry. It was a renowned school, a place of learning and refinement. He became the legendary tutor to a veritable who's who of Greek heroes. Young Achilles learned the art of the lyre, the skills of hunting, and the principles of medicine from Chiron. Jason, leader of the Argonauts, was another of his pupils. Asclepius, who would later become the god of medicine, received his foundational training in the healing arts from the wise centaur. Even heroes like Heracles, Theseus, and many others are said to have benefited from Chiron's tutelage, learning not just the arts of warfare but also morals, music, and respect for the gods. Imagine the parent-teacher conferences for Chiron's rather unique class of budding heroes. Yes, Queen Thetis. Young Achilles is showing wonderful aptitude in spear-throwing 101 and chariot maneuvering, but he really needs to work on his impulse control during diplomatic simulations. And as for little Heracles, well, he's broken 3 training dummies and a lyre this week. It's a challenging but rewarding cohort of students. Physically, Chiron was still a centaur, sharing that half-man, half-horse form. However, ancient artists sometimes depicted him with subtle differences to distinguish him from the other wilder centaurs. perhaps with human forelegs instead of equine ones, or wearing more dignified human-like clothing like a tunic, or with a generally more serene and thoughtful facial expression. His actions and his gentle demeanor, however, were what truly set him apart. A quirky tidbit that highlights Chiron's nurturing character comes from stories about his mother, Philyra. It's said that Philyra, upon seeing the half-horse child she had borne to Cronus, was so shocked or ashamed by his hybrid form that she pleaded with the gods to transform her into something else, anything else. Taking pity on her, or perhaps at Cronus's behest, she was changed into a linden tree, the Philyra in Greek. The linden tree, known for its fragrant, delicate blossoms and its leaves, which were sometimes used for writing or for medicinal purposes, thus became a gentle, subtle reminder of Chiron's mother, perhaps even symbolically contributing to his own later association with healing herbs and gentle wisdom. It's a poignant little side story to his unusual birth. Scholars often debate whether the figure of Chiron represents an older, perhaps pre-Hellenic benevolent nature spirit, a rustic deity of medicine or prophecy, who was later assimilated into the broader Greek pantheon and incorporated into the Centaur mythology, specifically as a civilized counterpart to the more threatening wild Ixionid centaurs. His unique parentage and almost universally positive portrayal might suggest he originates from a different stratum of myth than the more problematic main tribe. Perhaps he was a way to reconcile differing local traditions of horse hybrid beings, allowing for both a good and a bad type. Furthermore, the specific significance of Chiron's diverse skill set, his mastery of medicine, music, hunting, and prophecy, is often analyzed for its potential connections to ancient shamanistic traditions, or as an embodiment of the Greek ideal of a well-rounded education, where cultivated human intellect and noble physical prowess, represented by the horse, achieve a perfect, harmonious balance entirely distinct from the purely bestial nature of his kin. So, as you picture Chiron in his mountain cave, perhaps tending to a wound with a poultice of carefully chosen herbs, or patiently teaching a young hero the notes on a lyre's sense, the profound calm and wisdom that emanated from him. Hear the gentle authority in his voice, see the kindness in his eyes. He truly was the exception that proved the rule, demonstrating that not all centaurs were destined to be naysayers of civilization and order. Some, like Chiron, were actually quite stable and upstanding members of mythological society. Okay, I promise I'll try to rein in the horse puns for now. Chiron's story, including his tragic, accidental death at the hands of his friend Heracles, and his eventual immortalization as the constellation Centaurus or Sagittarius, depending on the tradition, is a rich and poignant one. His existence provides a vital counterpoint in the Centaur narrative, showing that this hybrid form didn't automatically equate to savagery. Having met this noble exception, we can now turn to how both types of centaurs, the wild and the wise, were depicted more broadly in the art and literature of the ancient Greeks. We've just spent some time in the company of Chiron, the noble and wise centaur whose very different parentage, son of a Titan and an Oceanid nymph, set him leagues apart from his wilder, more problematic kin, descended from Ixion and the cloud phantom Nephili. His existence alone tells us that the ancient Greeks didn't paint all centaurs with the same rough, boisterous brush. But how did ancient artists and writers generally depict these fascinating half-human, half-horse creatures? Did their portrayals in stone on pottery or in poetic verse give any visual or narrative clues that might support our sleepy inquiry into their potentially cloudy beginnings? Let's gently peer through the lens of ancient art and literature. When you look at visual representations of centaurs from ancient Greece, on painted vases, sculpted temple friezes, or intricate bronze figurines, what you almost invariably see is a very solid, very physical being. In the early Archaic period, say around the 7th or 8th centuries, BCE depictions could sometimes be a bit more experimental or even awkward. Some early centaurs are shown with a full human body and torso, with the hindquarters of a horse simply attached to their human back. The composite type. Others might appear more vaguely monstrous or less anatomically precise. One might whimsically wonder if any of these cruder, less defined early forms could be interpreted as hinting at something less solid than a fully realized horse, perhaps a creature still coalescing from a more nebulous origin. But that's probably stretching our sleepy imaginations a bit too far. It's more likely just early artistic conventions evolving. By the classical period, roughly the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the image of the centaur had become quite standardized. the powerful muscular torso of a man merging seamlessly at the waist or loins into the full body and four legs of a horse. These depictions emphasize their physical prowess, their often raw muscular energy, and for the wild Ixionid tribe, their untamed, sometimes bestial nature. Think of the magnificent metopes from the Parthenon in Athens, or the sculptures from the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, vividly portraying the Centauromachy, that chaotic battle between the Lapiths and the Centaurs. Here, the Centaurs are all rippling, muscle-contorted faces, and violent action embodying raw, untamed physicality. There's very little hint of anything ethereal or cloud-like in these powerful, earthy representations. Ancient Greek artists were clearly brilliant but successfully drawing or sculpting a creature that's simultaneously half man, half horse, and also, by the way, sort of descended from a sentient weather event, must have presented a rather unique artistic challenge. Right for this temple frieze, do I give the centaur a slightly fluffy, cumulus-like tail, or just make him look perpetually damp and a bit windswept? Probably easier to stick with the buff horse dude. When Chiron, our wise exception, is depicted, he's often visually distinguished from his wilder brethren. He might be shown wearing a tunic or a cloak, unlike the often nude wild centaurs, or carrying a branch, symbolizing his connection to nature and medicine, or a lyre. His expression is typically more serene and thoughtful, but even he is undeniably solid, a creature of flesh and bone and horse. Now, if we turn to ancient Greek literature, the picture becomes a little more nuanced. In the earliest epic poems, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, composed around the 8th century BCE, centaurs like Pholos and Eurytion are mentioned usually as wild mountain-dwelling savages, particularly in the context of that infamous brawl at Pirate House's wedding. However, Homer doesn't explicitly detail their origin story, and there's no clear mention of Ixion and Nephele or any cloudbirth in his works. This more fantastical origin myth seems to be either a later development or a parallel tradition that wasn't central to Homer's narrative focus. It is with the lyric poet Pindar, writing in the early 5th century BCE, that we get one of our earliest and most explicit literary accounts of the Ixion and Nephele myth. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. For our cloudy inquiry, Pindar, in his Pythian Ode 2, clearly recounts Ixion's terrible hubris, his lust for Hera, Zeus's creation of Nephele, the cloud, as Pindar calls her in Hera's image, and the subsequent birth of a monstrous son, Centaurus, a being honored neither among men nor in the customs of the gods, who then went on to mate with the Magnesian mares to produce the savage centaur race. So the story of the cloud origin was certainly known and circulating in the literary world of classical Greece. Pindar was essentially like, okay, gather round folks, so there was this really arrogant king Ixion, and then Zeus made this cloud clone of Hera, see? And then boom out pops this problematic dude Centaurus. And the vase painters and sculptors were probably like, yeah, cool story, Pindar. Very poetic. We're just gonna keep drawing the buff dude with the horse butt fighting Heracles. It's easier to get onto a pot, and frankly, it sells better. Artists always so wonderfully practical. Later Greek tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, also touched upon myths involving centaurs, often highlighting their tragic flaws, their wildness, or their role in the larger sagas of heroes like Heracles. And then the later mythographers, those invaluable scholars and compilers of ancient tales, like Apollodorus Diodorus Siculus Ovid in his Metamorphoses, and Hyginus diligently collected and retold these stories, including various versions of centaur origins. These writers frequently include the strange and memorable tale of Ixion and Nephele, ensuring its survival. So does the art and literature truly reflect or engage with the cloud origin in a significant way beyond just telling the story? Visually, as we've seen, not so much. The centaur in art is overwhelmingly a creature of solid form. The idea of their cloud ancestry, however, was definitely present in the literary tradition, thanks to Pindar and his successors. But even when this origin is acknowledged, the narrative focus often quickly shifts to the centaur's physical wildness, their equine nature, and their problematic interactions with human society. It's like the original book versus the movie adaptation debate. The literary centaurs, some of them at least, have this whole complicated, rather bizarre, cloudy backstory. The sculpted or painted centaurs, on the other hand, are mostly just there to look impressively muscular and possibly to be in the process of throwing a wine amphora or abducting someone. Different artistic priorities, perhaps. Perhaps the cloud aspect of their origin isn't meant to be interpreted literally in their physical form, as much as it is symbolically in their nature. Their descent from Nephele, the insubstantial cloud phantom, could represent the emptiness or illusory nature of Ixion's illicit desire. Their wild, unpredictable, and sometimes destructive behavior could be seen as a metaphor for the untamable, chaotic power of a storm. Beautiful from a distance, perhaps, but dangerous up close. A quirky tidbit is that while the centaurs themselves are rarely depicted as overtly cloud-like, some ancient artworks or descriptions of Nephele herself emphasize her ethereal nature. You might find vase paintings where Nephele is shown perhaps a little more translucently than other figures, or with a swirling, misty quality to her robes, visually hinting at her cloud essence, even if her subsequent centaur descendants are portrayed as fully solid. These are subtle artistic nods to her unique composition. Scholars often debate whether the strong visual emphasis in Greek art on the centaur's physical, often intensely bestial, man-horse form effectively overshadowed, or perhaps even intentionally downplayed, the more bizarre and less easily representable cloud origin myth that was certainly present in their literature. Was it simply easier and more dramatically effective to depict the clash between civilized man and savage man-horse? A theme that resonated powerfully with Greek ideas of order versus chaos, Hellenes versus barbarians, or the chronological relationship and interplay between the cloud origin myth, Ixion, Nephele, and the more rationalizing mistaken horseman theory, as they appear in various ancient sources, is also a complex area. It's not always clear which concept might be older, or which held more sway in the popular imagination when the iconic image of the centaur was first being forged. So as you picture these ancient depictions, imagine the cold, enduring stone of a temple frieze, where centaurs are locked in eternal muscular combat, or the vibrant narrative-rich colors on a painted wine vase showing their rowdy exploits. The story of their cloudy grandmother might have been whispered by poets and scholars, but in the public eye of art, they were usually all too solidly and often savagely present. Their most famous mythological appearance, the one that truly cemented their reputation, was that very battle we've mentioned, the Centauromachy. We've just been peering through the lens of ancient Greek art and literature, noticing how artists and poets, while acknowledging the strange cloud-born origin story of the centaurs, through figures like Pindar, tended to visually and narratively emphasize their very solid, often alarmingly physical half-man, half-horse forms. These weren't usually depicted as misty, ethereal beings. And nowhere is this robust physicality, this untamed bestial nature, more vividly and violently displayed than in the most famous mythological event involving the Centaur tribe, the legendary Centauromachy, the epic battle between the Lapiths and the Centaurs. So let's you and I gently witness this monumental clash, a conflict that became for the ancient Greeks a profound symbol of the struggle between civilization and savagery. The stage for this epic brawl was, as is so often the case in Greek myths, where things go spectacularly wrong, a wedding feast. Pirate housed the king of the Lapiths, a hardy tribe of men dwelling in Thessaly, and in a touch of deep mythological irony, often considered kinsmen to the centaurs through their shared ancestor Ixion, who was a Lapith king before his celestial misadventures, but was celebrating his marriage to the beautiful Hippodamia. In a gesture of kinship, or perhaps just extremely optimistic neighborliness, the centaurs, their wild cousins from nearby Mount Pelion, were invited to the festivities. This, as you might predict if you've been paying attention to the general centaur reputation, was Pirithouse's first and arguably biggest mistake. Rule number one for planning a peaceful and successful ancient Greek wedding: maybe don't invite that entire notoriously rowdy tribe of half-horse dudes who have a well-documented weakness for unwatered wine and a rather troubling history of significant boundary issues. At first, things might have seemed convivial enough. But the centaurs, unaccustomed to the cultivated pleasures of civilization, and particularly unfamiliar with the proper diluted way the Greeks drank their wine, quickly became roaringly drunk on the potent, unmixed stuff. And as the wine flowed their more primal bestial natures, That legacy of Ixion's hubris and Nephili's chaotic cloud essence began to surface. Eurytion, one of the leading and most boorish of the centaurs overcome with drunken lust, suddenly lunged for the bride, Hippodamia herself attempting to drag her away. His fellow centaurs, never once to be left out of a good or bad rampage, promptly followed his lead, trying to seize and carry off the Lapith women and even the young boys attending the feast. All notions of guest right and civilized behavior were trampled under their thundering hooves. Chaos erupted. The feasting hall turned into a battleground. The Lapith men, including renowned heroes like Theseus, the king of Athens, who was a close friend and honored guest of Pirate House, sprang to the defense of their women and their honor. What followed was a brutal, savage, no-holds-barred fight. The centaurs in their drunken fury fought with crude, improvised weapons. Rocks, burning torches, snatched from the feast, uprooted trees and heavy branches. The Lapith's more disciplined warriors wielded swords, spears, and shields. It's a central mainstream historical fact immortalized in countless relief sculptures and vase paintings that this Centauromachy, this legendary battle between the Lapiths and the centaurs, became one of the most canonical and potent themes in Greek art and literature. It served as a powerful allegory for the triumph of Greek civilization, with its emphasis on reason, order, and self-control over the forces of barbarism, chaos, and unrestrained bestial passion. Certain figures stood out in the melee. The Athenian hero Theseus fought valiantly alongside his friend Pirate House. Another notable Lapith warrior was Caeneus. According to myth, Caeneus was originally a woman named Canis, who, after being violated by the sea god, Poseidon was granted her wish to be transformed into an invulnerable man. During the Centauromachy, Caeneus's invulnerability frustrated the centaurs as their weapons could not pierce his skin. Unable to defeat him conventionally, they resorted to piling massive rocks and entire fir trees upon him, eventually crushing him and burying him beneath the earth. It's the ultimate wedding crashers story, isn't it? But with significantly more hooves, fewer witty one-liners, and considerably less Owen Wilson. The Lapiths were probably all thinking, right note to self next time we're eloping, and we're definitely not serving anything stronger than very, very diluted grape juice. Ultimately, after a long and bloody struggle, the Lapiths, representing order and civilization, were victorious. They managed to drive the surviving centaurs from Thessaly, expelling them from their ancestral haunts on Mount Pelion and scattering them to other wild parts of Greece. The victory was a powerful affirmation of Greek cultural values. This is why the Centauromachy was such a popular subject for the decoration of sacred temples, like the metopes of the Parthenon in Athens, the west pediment of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, and the frieze of the Temple of Apollo Epikurios at Besae. These public artworks served as constant visual reminders to the Greek citizens of the importance of their civilized values and their perceived superiority over the barbarian forces that threatened them, whether those forces were external enemies or the untamed passions within themselves. Now, does the centaur's supposed cloud origin through Nephali play an explicit role in most accounts of the Centauromachy itself? Not directly. The ancient narratives of the battle tend to focus on their immediate actions, their drunkenness, their lust, their violence, rather than on their peculiar grandmother. However, their inherent wildness, their inability to control their primal urges, the very characteristics that led to the catastrophic conflict, can certainly be seen as consistent with their problematic and unnatural lineage. Their behavior at the wedding feast is precisely what you might expect from creatures born of transgression illusion, and an untamable atmospheric force, further compounded by their later intermingling with wild mares. They truly gave new meaning to the phrase, making a scene at a wedding. They weren't just having a heated argument over the seating chart or complaining about the band. They were attempting to abduct the bride and half the bridal party. Talk about a bridezilla moment for poor Hippodamia, but entirely in reverse. A quirky tidbit from some of the more vivid literary or artistic depictions of the Centauromachy involves the sheer brutality and sometimes even the dark humor of the fight. One particularly striking account, perhaps from a later poet embellishing the tale, describes a desperate centaur, his usual weapons lost attempting to wield a massive, ornate bronze wine crater. Mixing bowl still half full of wine as a club, only to slip in the spilled wine and bring the heavy vessel crashing down upon his own head, stunning himself long enough for a Lapith warrior to dispatch him. It's a small, chaotic detail that underscores the messy, drunken, and almost farcical nature of their savagery. Other depictions show Lapith women far from being passive victims, fiercely fighting back against their centaur assailants, perhaps wielding serving implements or even broken furniture as makeshift weapons, highlighting their courage and the sheer desperation of the struggle. Scholars continue to debate the deeper historical and cultural resonances of the Centauromachy myth. Was it primarily an allegorical narrative invented or embellished to explore fundamental philosophical and cultural dichotomies? Reason versus passion, Greek versus barbarian order versus chaos? Or could it perhaps reflect heavily mythologized folk memories of actual historical conflicts between more settled agricultural Greek communities in the plains of Thessaly and rougher, more nomadic or primitive tribes inhabiting the mountainous regions? Furthermore, the specific choice of a wedding feast, a sacred rite meant to establish social order, create new family alliances, and ensure legitimate procreation, as the setting for this violent outbreak is often analyzed for its profound symbolic importance. The Centaur's actions represent a violent disruption of this sacred social and cosmic order by uncontrolled lust and pure chaos. The Centauromachy then stands as the definitive event cementing the wild, dangerous reputation of the main Centaur tribe. It's a story that showcases their inability to adhere to civilized norms, their susceptibility to their baser instincts, and the threat they pose to the Greek ideal of an ordered society. Having witnessed this epic clash and understanding its symbolic weight, we can now wonder if other cultures and other lands also dreamed up similar hybrid creatures, or beings perhaps born like Nephili's children from the very clouds themselves. We've just relived the brutal, chaotic, and highly symbolic clash of the Centauromachy, that epic wedding feast gone wrong, which firmly cemented the reputation of the main Centaur tribe as wild, unruly, and a potent symbol of barbarism versus Greek civilization. Their actions in that myth certainly seem a far cry from any gentle, misty, cloud-like origins, don't they? But before we try to reconcile these different facets of the Centaur persona, it's interesting to take a brief, sleepy glance across the wider world of ancient mythologies. Were the ancient Greeks the only ones to dream up creatures that were part human, part horse? Or beings that claimed a lineage, however strange, from the very clouds and skies themselves? Let's take a little detour and see if we can find any global cousins to our problematic Thessalian herd or their cloud mother Nephili. The fascination with hybrid creatures. Those beings that blend human and animal characteristics is a near universal feature of mythology across the globe. These composite beings often embody dual natures, bridging the gap between the human world and the animal kingdom, or the mortal realm and the divine. They can represent raw power, untamed instinct, wisdom, ferocity, or spiritual transcendence. So the idea of a half-man, half-horse isn't entirely unique in its hybridity, even if the Greek centaur has a particularly famous and well-defined form. If we look to Indian mythology, for instance, we find some fascinating parallels, or at least figures that resonate with certain aspects of the centaur. The Gandharvas are a class of male nature spirits often depicted as celestial musicians of incredible skill, renowned for their beauty and their association with soma, a ritual drink and heavenly fragrances. It's a well-established mainstream historical fact that, in Hindu mythology, Gandharvas are these divine artistic beings often considered the husbands of the Apsaras, celestial nymphs. While they are typically portrayed as handsome humanoids, some traditions and artistic representations, particularly in earlier periods or specific regional variations, do associate them with horses or describe them as being partly equine, perhaps with a horse's head or body. Their celestial, airy nature and occasional equine links make them an interesting point of comparison, though they are generally far more refined and less aggressively problematic than your average Pelion centaur. The Gandharvas, celestial musicians, sometimes part horse, often associated with heavenly fragrances and beautiful cloud nymph consorts. Basically, they sound like the original My Little Pony boy band, but with significantly more divine talent, and probably much better celestial record deals than Ixion's rowdy cloud-descended offspring ever managed. Also from India, you have the Kinnaris male and Kinnaris female, another group of celestial musicians. They are more commonly depicted as half-human, half-bird, but In some regional traditions, especially in Southeast Asian cultures influenced by Indian mythology, they can sometimes appear as half-human, half-horse figures again, sharing that hybrid, otherworldly quality. If we cast our gaze towards ancient Persian mythology, direct man-horse hybrids like the classical Greek Centaur are less prominent. Their imaginative bestiary tends to feature other impressive composites like the Lamassu, those great winged bulls with human heads that guarded Assyrian and Babylonian palaces and certainly influenced Persian art, or the majestic griffin part, eagle part lion. While not centaurs, these creatures demonstrate a similar creative impulse to combine powerful animal forms with human or other potent animal attributes to create beings of symbolic power. Moving to Norse or Celtic traditions in Europe, you don't find many direct analogues to the Greek centaur in terms of a half-man, half-horse creature forming a distinct race. Norse mythology boasts magical horses like Sleipnir Odin's eight-legged steed and tales of shapeshifters who might take equine form but not a tribe of permanent hybrids in the centaur mold. Scottish folklore has the Kelpie, a dangerous and malevolent water spirit that often appears as a horse, but it's more of a shape-shifting trickster than a true centaur-like hybrid. But what about being specifically born from clouds or associated with the sky like our Nephele and her potential offspring? Here, the parallels become more abundant, though often different in form. In Chinese mythology, dragons are profoundly linked with clouds, rainstorms in the sky. They are benevolent usually and incredibly powerful sky beings able to summon rain or part the mists. While not human-animal hybrids in the centaur sense, they are definitely powerful entities whose domain is the atmosphere. Chinese folklore also features tales of cloud maidens or celestial weavers' spirits who dwell in the sky. Many Native American mythologies feature the thunderbird, a colossal bird responsible for creating thunder by the beating of its wings and lightning from the flashing of its eyes, a powerful stormbringer. There are also numerous traditions of cloud spirits. Sky people are beings who descend from the heavens, each with their own unique stories and significance. Back in Hindu mythology, the Apsaras, often the consorts of the Gandharvas, are frequently described as celestial nymphs associated with clouds and waters able to change their shape. And many of the primary Vedic gods, like Indra, the king of the gods in the Vedic pantheon, are powerful sky and storm deities, riding celestial chariots through the heavens, much like Zeus with his thunderbolts. So it seems the ancient Greeks certainly weren't the only ones looking up at the dynamic, ever-changing canvas of the sky and seeing more than just, well, clouds and weather patterns. Darling, one ancient sky gazer might have said to another, does that particularly impressive cumulonimbus formation look a bit like a divine musician with a horse's head to you? Or have I had too much fermented mare's milk again? A quirky tidbit from the broader world of atmospheric folklore comes from some remote Siberian shamanistic traditions. It's said that among certain indigenous groups there are ancient tales of cloud reindeer, or even semi-humanoid spirit guides who appear as beings part man, part reindeer born from the swirling mist of the taiga, or the fogs that roll in from the Arctic. These beings were believed to guide lost hunters or offer wisdom to shamans. A different primary animal, of course, but a strikingly similar concept of an atmospheric liminal hybrid being connected to the wild and the spiritual. When we compare these global examples with the Greek centaurs and the Nephili myth, we see both similarities and striking differences. The fascination with human-animal hybrids is widespread, as is the personification of natural forces, especially powerful sky and weather phenomena. However, the specific Greek narrative of Ixion's hubris, Zeus's deceptive creation of a cloud clone of his own wife, and the subsequent birth of a problematic lineage that then mates with wild mares to produce the iconic half-man, half-horse creature seems to be quite unique in its intricate, scandalous, and psychologically complex details. It's like there was an ancient global mythological memo sent out, "Attention all cultures. Your foundational mythologies must include at least one really weird human-animal mashup and at least one moody character born from a significant weather event. Please get creative, people." The Greeks clearly got that memo and ran with it with particular enthusiasm when it came to the centaurs. Scholars of comparative mythology constantly debate whether these striking similarities between hybrid creatures or sky beings found across vastly different and geographically distant cultures suggest direct cultural diffusion along ancient trade routes, or perhaps a common descent from even more ancient Proto-Indo-European or other Ewer mythology roots. Alternatively, they explore whether these are instances of independent, yet parallel psychological archetypes arising from universal human experiences of nature, the cosmos, and our own dualities. Furthermore, the very definition of a cloud being in mythology is itself open to scholarly interpretation. Does it necessitate a literal birth from a cloud like the supposed offspring of Nephilim? Or can beings who are merely strongly associated with clouds and storms like Chinese dragons or the thunderbird also fit into this category in a broader, more symbolic sense? This brief global tour shows us that while the specifics of the Centaur's cloud-kissed origin might be uniquely Greek, the underlying themes, the power of the sky, the mystery of clouds, the fascination with hybridity, resonate across many ancient cultures. Having glanced at these worldwide parallels, we can now return our focus to the Greek Centaur and face the rather perplexing task of trying to reconcile those two primary origin theories we've been exploring for them: the fantastical cloud birth and the more rational mistaken horseman. We've just taken a fascinating, if brief, gallop through the mythological landscapes of other ancient cultures, discovering that while the Greek Centaur, with its specific, scandalous cloud-born lineage through Ixion and Nephilim, is rather unique, the wider human imagination has certainly populated its skies and wild places with all manner of hybrid beings and celestial atmospheric entities. This global context makes the Greek myths feel both special in their details and part of a larger universal human tapestry of storytelling. But now let's bring our focus back to ancient Greece, and that central, rather perplexing question: where did their centaurs truly come from? Can we untangle these various origin theories, the scandalous cloud birth, the mistaken horseman, the purely symbolic interpretations, and find a single neat answer? Or is the truth, like a cloud itself, a bit more shape-shifting? As we've explored, there are a few prominent contenders vying for the title of Original Centaur Story. First, we have the wonderfully bizarre and dramatic Ixion and Nephilim cloud theory, a tale of divine retribution, a phantom cloud goddess, and an unnatural union leading to a monstrous or problematic lineage that eventually sires the wild centaur race. This theory, as we saw from Pindar, has ancient literary roots and certainly explains the notoriously unruly and unnatural character of the main centaur tribe. They are in this version quite literally born from a storm of hubris and illusion. Then there's the more down-to-earth, mistaken horseman theory, the rationalist idea that the image of a half-man, half-horse creature arose when people unfamiliar with horsemanship first encountered skilled mounted warriors and, from a distance or in confusion, perceived rider and steed as a single terrifying entity. This theory neatly explains their hybrid form and their association with regions like Thessaly, famed for its cavalry. And finally, we have the broader symbolic or allegorical interpretations. The idea that centaurs, regardless of any literal origin, primarily represent the inherent dual nature within humanity. The struggle between our higher, rational intellect, the human part, and our lower primal instincts and passions, the animal part. The Centauromachai, that epic battle between Lapiths and centaurs, is the prime example of this, a grand allegory for the conflict between civilization and barbarism, order and chaos. So which one is it? The beauty, and perhaps the very point of mythology, is that these theories are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Trying to find the one true, scientifically verifiable origin of a creature like the centaur is a bit like trying to catch a particularly fluffy cloud in a butterfly net. It's a beautiful and fascinating endeavor, but the subject itself is likely to slip through your fingers, change shape, and perhaps even rain on your parade a little. Myths are not historical documents or scientific treatises. They are living, evolving stories that accumulate layers of meaning over time. The ancient Greeks themselves were clearly masters of the yes and approach to storytelling. Are centaurs badly behaved and a bit chaotic because they were essentially born from a grumpy, artificially generated cloud and a monumentally hubristic king? Yes, absolutely. And are they also perhaps a distorted folk memory of some dudes on horses who really scared someone a long time ago? Also, yes, why not both? And can they also represent our inner turmoil, you bet? It's quite possible that different elements contributed to the rich and complex tapestry of the centaur myth. Perhaps the mistaken horseman encounters provided an early startling visual stimulus, planting the seed for the image of a man-horse creature in the collective imagination. This raw image could then have been elaborated upon by poets and storytellers who wove in the dramatic and morally instructive tale of Ixion and Nephili to explain the centaur's wild character and their problematic relationship with gods and men. The philosophical allegory of civilization versus barbarism could then have been layered on top or have developed in parallel as Greek society itself became more self-conscious about its own values and its relationship with the other. The very setting of many centaur myths, the wild region of Thessaly and particularly Mount Pelion, supports this multifaceted view. Thessaly, as we've noted, was renowned for its horses and cavalry lending credence to the mistaken horseman idea. But its rugged mountains, deep forests, and propensity for sudden storms also make it a fitting liminal space for wild nature spirits, for creatures born of clouds, or for beings that exist on the very fringes of the civilized world. And then we have Chiron, our noble exception. His entirely different parentage, son of the Titan Cronus and the Oceanid nymph Philyra, strongly suggests that he represents a separate, possibly much older mythological strand. It's a significant mainstream historical fact that the distinct origin story and overwhelmingly positive, civilized portrayal of Chiron, which contrasts so sharply with the savage Ixionid centaurs, has led many scholars to believe he was originally an independent, benevolent nature spirit, a wise teacher figure or a minor healing deity from a pre-Hellenic or localized Thessalian tradition. He might have been retrospectively centaurized, given the familiar half-man, half-horse form, once that image became established, perhaps as a way to incorporate and preserve this revered figure within the broader Greek mythological system, providing a necessary good counterpart to the predominantly bad centaur tribe. His story doesn't neatly fit with either the cloud-born or the mistaken horseman theory for the main unruly herd. It's like a mythological potluck dinner. The mistaken horseman theory brought the basic, hearty man-horse casserole. The dramatic Ixion Nephili story brought the fancy, rather scandalous dessert with the weirdly shaped cloud meringue on top. And Chiron just brought a nice, sensible infusion of wisdom and medicinal herbs, which is always welcome at any gathering. Even if we lean towards the mistaken horseman as an initial visual spark, the Nephili cloud origin story still carries immense symbolic weight. The cloud doesn't have to be a literal physical component of the later centaur's anatomy for the myth to be meaningful. Nephili, the cloud phantom, can be a powerful metaphor for the insubstantial or illusory nature of Ixion's criminal desire. He grasps at a phantom and the result is monstrous. Her atmospheric nature can symbolize the stormy, unpredictable, or untamable character of her descendants. The whole episode is a divine trick, a delusion engineered by Zeus leading to calamitous and monstrous consequences, a classic Greek cautionary tale about hubris. A quirky tidbit that touches on this metaphorical interpretation comes from how some ancient Greek philosophers, particularly the Stoics, approached myths. They were quite fond of allegorizing these ancient tales, stripping away the literal narrative to find deeper moral or physical truths. A Stoic philosopher might well have interpreted Nephili not as a literal cloud that somehow engaged in biology with Ixion, but as a potent symbol of Ixion's own clouded judgment, his obscured reason, or the empty and illusory nature of his base unchecked desires. For them, the entire story would become a profound moral allegory about the dangers of passion, overwhelming intellect, rather than a literal creation event involving atmospheric phenomena. The ongoing scholarly debate, therefore, isn't so much about definitively proving one single origin theory for the centaurs to the absolute exclusion of all others. Rather, it's about attempting to understand the complex dynamic interplay of potential historical encounters. Like seeing foreign horsemen, deep-seated psychological archetypes, the human-animal duality, powerful poetic invention, the Ixion Nephili drama, and evolving philosophical allegory that all likely contributed to the formation, development, and enduring resonance of this fascinating myth over many centuries. Furthermore, the relative age of these different narrative strands, for example, did a more primitive, perhaps shamanistic nature spirit image like Chiron's archetype precede the more common mistaken horseman idea, or vice versa, before the elaborate and literary Ixion Nephili myth was fully formed and popularized by poets like Pindar, is a complex puzzle with limited direct early evidence, making it a rich field for continued scholarly inquiry. So, as you drift and dream, perhaps the best way to approach the origin of the centaur is not with an either-or, but with a both and then some. The richness of these ancient myths often lies precisely in their multiple layers of meaning. Their ability to be many things at once, a half-remembered history, a poetic flight of fancy, a moral lesson, and a timeless symbol. The centaur, whether born of a cloud, a misunderstanding, or the depths of the human psyche, has certainly had a long and fascinating gallop through our collective imagination. And that perhaps is the most enduring truth of all. We've spent this sleepy session untangling the rather peculiar origins of the centaurs, pondering whether their first ancestor was indeed a rain cloud, a product of King Ixion's hubris and Zeus's deceptive cloud phantom Nephili, or perhaps a more down-to-earth misunderstanding of skilled horsemen on the distant horizon. We've seen that Greek mythology and its wonderful layered complexity often allows for multiple truths, multiple origins where fact metaphor and pure imaginative myth can all swirl together like the very clouds we've been discussing. But regardless of precisely how they first thundered into the Greek imagination, there's no denying the enduring power and fascination of these half-human, half-horse creatures. So for our final few moments together tonight, let's reflect on why the centaur in all its wild and wise duality has continued its gallop through time right into our modern consciousness. The centaur at its core is a creature of profound duality. This perhaps more than anything accounts for its lasting appeal. In the wild Ixionid tribe, we see the raw, untamed forces of nature, the power of primal instinct, the struggle against the constraints of civilization, their animalistic lower half often overwhelming their human intellect, leading to chaos and violence. Yet in the figure of Chiron, we see the opposite potential. The human capacity for wisdom, gentleness, healing, and teaching, harmoniously blended with the noble strength and connection to nature symbolized by the horse. This inherent tension between the beast and the man, between passion and reason, chaos and order, is a timeless theme that resonates deeply within the human experience itself. We all perhaps feel that internal push and pull. This potent symbolism ensured the centaur's passage from ancient Greece into the broader Western cultural inheritance. The Romans, who so readily adopted and adapted Greek mythology, continued to tell tales of centaurs, and figures like Chiron maintained their esteemed place. Ovid in his Metamorphoses gives us vivid if gruesome accounts of the Centauromachy, ensuring that image of their wildness was carried forward. During the medieval period in Europe, as Christianity took hold, pagan creatures like centaurs often underwent a symbolic reinterpretation. Their bestial aspects, their association with uncontrolled lust and violence, could lead to them being demonized, seen as symbols of heresy, sin, or even as forms of the Antichrist. Their hybrid nature was often viewed with suspicion as something unnatural and ungodly. However, even then, the figure of the wise Chiron sometimes retained a more positive connotation, perhaps as an allegorical figure for learning or even a pre-Christian sage. With the Renaissance and its passionate rediscovery of classical art and literature, centaurs charged back into the artistic imagination. Scenes of the Centauromachy became popular again, offering artists a chance to depict dynamic action, muscular anatomy, and that classic struggle between order and chaos. Botticelli's enigmatic painting Pallas and the Centaur, for example, can be interpreted in many ways, perhaps showing wisdom. Pallas Athena taming brute instinct, or melancholy the centaur. Centaurs appeared in pastoral scenes, sometimes symbolizing untamed nature, sometimes as figures of melancholy wisdom, sometimes simply as part of the rich tapestry of classical illusion. This fascination continued through later art and literature, with Romanticism often emphasizing their connection to wild, untamed wilderness and primal instinct. And as we gallop closer to our own time, centaurs have become an absolute staple in modern fantasy literature, role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons video games and films. It's a clear mainstream historical fact that centaurs have remained a remarkably popular and highly adaptable figure in Western art literature and popular culture, ever since antiquity, frequently appearing in medieval bestiaries, inspiring Renaissance masterpieces, and now thriving in virtually every corner of the modern fantasy genre, where their depiction ranges dramatically from savage territorial brutes to noble, wise, and reclusive warrior races or guardians of ancient forests. So, from a rather scandalous and potentially quite damp incident on Mount Olympus involving a very angry god, and an even angrier cloud to a starring role in your favorite video game or fantasy novel series, centaurs have certainly had an impressive and enduring career arc. Talk about mythological staying power. What accounts for this persistent appeal? As we touched upon, it's likely their profound symbolism of duality. They are the ultimate visual metaphor for the human condition, caught between our higher aspirations and our baser instincts. There's also the undeniable allure of their power and freedom. The horse part evokes speed, untamed strength, and a deep instinctual connection to the natural world, something many of us in our increasingly urbanized lives might unconsciously yearn for. They are liminal beings, creatures that bridge worlds human and animal, the civilized and the wild, the earthly. And perhaps if we remember their very first strange origins through Nephilim, even a faint lingering connection to the sky. And their very nature is adaptable. Their meaning can shift and be reinterpreted to reflect the anxieties and aspirations of each new era that rediscovers them. Now, does that original cloud origin theory, the very question that set us on this sleepy path tonight, really matter to their lasting legacy? In most popular modern depictions, it has to be said the strange tale of Ixion and Nephilim is largely forgotten or ignored. The focus is almost entirely on the visually striking half-man, half-horse form and the behavioral dichotomy of wild versus wise. It's a good thing perhaps that most modern fantasy centaurs don't seem to have directly inherited Ixion's appalling table manners or Nephilim's alarming tendency to get misty and perhaps even evaporate if the atmospheric pressure drops too suddenly. Imagine trying to have a serious diplomatic negotiation with a centaur ambassador who might literally just dissipate into a fine drizzle if the castle heating is up too high. Yet knowing about that peculiar cloudbirth adds an undeniable layer of depth and strangeness to their original conception. It underscores their unnatural or divinely interfered with beginnings, contributing to their profound sense of otherness, and perhaps even the inherent tragedy of their existence, especially for the wild Ixionid tribe, forever marked by their flawed and illusory genesis. A quirky tidbit that keeps the centaur quite literally in our modern view is their presence in the night sky. The constellation Centaurus, one of the largest and brightest in the southern sky, is often identified with Chiron, placed among the stars by Zeus after his tragic death. Its brightest star, Alpha Centauri, also known as Rigil Centaurus, meaning foot of the centaur, is our closest stellar neighbor beyond the sun. And the nearby constellation Sagittarius the Archer is also frequently identified with a centaur, often Chiron again, forever aiming his bow towards the heart of the scorpion. It's a rather lovely thought that these ancient beings continue their silent, eternal gallop among the stars. The way centaurs are depicted and interpreted in modern fantasy and popular culture, whether as noble, wise savages, brutal monsters, complex tribal societies, or even romantic figures, often reflects contemporary cultural attitudes towards nature, the concept of the other, the challenges of hybridity, and our own internal struggles. This is far removed, of course, from their specific ancient Greek mythological contexts and moral lessons. The almost complete modern cultural amnesia regarding the details of the Ixion Nephilim cloud origin myth in favor of the more immediately accessible and visually straightforward man-horse hybrid also raises interesting questions about how ancient myths are often simplified, rationalized, or selectively remembered over time to fit new cultural understandings and storytelling needs. So the next time you encounter a centaur in a book, a film, or a game, perhaps you'll look at it with a slightly different, sleepier, and more informed gaze. You can be that person who leans over and whispers knowingly to your companion. Actually, according to some of the oldest Greek myths, their great-great-great-grandmother was probably a sentient weather pattern, with serious commitment issues created as part of a divine sting operation. Your friends will undoubtedly love you for sharing such fascinating, if slightly obscure mythological insights. Or they might possibly never go to the movies with you again. It's a gamble. Our journey tonight into the heart of a very strange and ancient myth is now drawing to its close. We've pondered the thundering hooves of the familiar centaur, and then dared to imagine a more ethereal, cloudy beginning born of human arrogance and divine trickery. We've seen how this lineage might account for their wildness and how a different, nobler centaur Quran offered a path of wisdom. Whether they first appeared as riders on a distant horizon or as the troubled offspring of a phantom cloud, their story is a rich tapestry of human creativity, trying to make sense of the world, our nature, and the power of the gods. And now, as these ancient tales and thunderous hooves begin to fade into the soft quiet of your surroundings, allow your mind to become as still and peaceful as a clear night sky. Let go of all the complexities, the scholarly debates, the quirky details. Just allow the gentle cadence of our story to become a soft, lulling rhythm. Imagine perhaps the constellation Centaurus wheeling slowly, silently across the vast, velvet expanse of the heavens, a timeless reminder of these ancient wonders. Feel any lingering thoughts or worries gently drift away like clouds dissolving in the starlight. There is nothing more for you to do now, but to rest, to allow the deep peace of this moment to envelop you completely. Let the quiet mystery of the ages cradle you as you drift effortlessly, serenely into a deep and wonderfully restorative sleep. May your dreams be filled with ancient wonders and a profound sense of calm.